if a guy is going to mess this product up, and believe me, guys will find unique and interesting ways to do that with just about anything, myself included. What are the easiest pitfalls to avoid with your stain?
The easiest pitfalls is basically it comes down to the sanding process. Skipping too many grits, going from a 40 to a 100 grit, and then the halos around the walls.
Great ways to mess it up would be too thick, roll it on too thick. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you'll have a guy do a perfect application, but as they go over like a seam in the concrete or relief cut, it'll puddle in there and bubble up. No problem, scrape it off. It's still fine.
Yeah.
When the jug, so it's a single component, so there's no waste. So if you're not going to use the full thing, clean that lid off, because if not, you're cutting that sucker off. Because once it dries, you ain't getting it off. And if you don't want it somewhere, make sure it don't go there.
Yeah.
Because I tell people, tape off the front porch, the back porch, wherever you can go in and out of. Put something down you can step your feet off, because I get calls all the time, and we'll say it right here. If you don't want it on there, make sure don't get there, because it ain't coming off. You have mineral spirits within like 45 minutes to wipe it off.
The rules of rift versus border, those are hugely important. That's probably one of the biggest calls I get was it wasn't rift enough, it wasn't quartered enough.
Prep those floors and test it. Test your floors. Do not go in and coat a floor blindly. You'll get away with it sometimes. Like you'll get away with it maybe 1 out of 10 times or 9 out of 10 times. But like that one time is going to be on a 5,000 footer.
Yeah.
And you're going to be, that's enough to almost put a lot of these guys out of business.
Generally spreading it too thin, that's going to come up and bite them, just because that floor is going to probably wear prematurely.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about sealers, is coating over stains too quickly. I recognize that there are stain manufacturers out there that tout a 2-hour dry time before they can be coated over. A thing to keep in mind is all of those stain manufacturers, I have no quarrel with any of them out there. The one thing they do talk about is that 2 hours is under ideal circumstances or ideal climate conditions. And so if you're in South Florida in July, it's going to be humid, and that stain is not going to be ready to coat in 2 hours in a lot of scenarios.
Because like I said before, if you put it on too thick, it can have a tendency to bubble a little bit, and you'll see it. You'll see it start to turn white and start to bubble before it's even dry. So it's easily fixable, because you can just pull it back out and spread it throughout the floor. But if you do lay it on too thick and it does bubble and those bubbles break, like I said, that can compromise your moisture barrier, because as we know, moisture is going to find a way. So water always finds a way.
The easiest pitfall is one, always drop the oil in it so you can keep your seals going. But what we've done, and on the older models, we've remedied this with the newer ones. But the spring-loaded lever actually has an Allen wrench screw that is designed, or is same size as the gate plate screws here, where you clear your jams. So guys would actually unscrew this and the spring would pop out, and that would be probably the number one warranty issue that we've had, is a busted lever, either unscrewed or guys are over cranking it and actually snapping it off. So
maintenance wise, the main thing that we ask guys is to make sure you're blowing off the triple head every day, because it is a gear driven and chain driven device, and that dust over time will heat up and build up on there. So that is probably the most important thing to do maintenance wise.
When it comes to adhesives, of course, it's always trowel size, making sure that they use the appropriate trowel size. If you're trying to use an all-in-one, make sure you use the clip under the lid. I have been to multiple job sites where the guy used the all-in-one, and I asked him what trowel he used, and he brings the trowel out of his truck, and I said, what about the clip that was under the lid? Oh no, we don't use those. So we get a lot of guys who are doing the engineering themselves on the job site with whatever trowel they happen to have in the truck, even though we supply them the appropriate trowel in the bucket.
The one thing that I would say is, whenever you're using it as a sander, try to keep that handle as vertical as possible, because you want a vertical weight. You want that weight to stay. If you lower that, say you don't have the weight kit, on there, and you're using that, you just have an opportunity to heal, that machine, and you don't want to do that. when it comes to obviously having a consistent flat cut.
I mean, when you mix up that product, you want guys to get it out onto the floor as fast as they can, so that you don't want it sitting in that can for 45 minutes. You want it out of that can right away, right?
No, absolutely. Because as it sits in that can and that chemical reaction takes place, and the longer it sits in that can, that with that chemical reaction, it is going to start to thicken. It's going to gel up. And while we're on the subject of this, if you do mix it in the can, you're done with the project and you've got some leftover that's hardened in that can, you do not want to put that top back on that can, because in essence, that chemical reaction will continue and start to expand, and eventually it's going to pop. And I know of at least 2 scenarios where contractors have either redecorated the interior of a home or their van with hardened cans of magic oil.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one would be the black bottle, the ambering. Again, that's what it's supposed to do, and somehow that gets missed by some, and then they're surprised when it ambers. It'll also, if you leave drips or puddles, it'll let you know with a bright orange spot where you did it, when it dries, because it's the thicker and it ambers so quickly.
Traffic HD, just being a 2-component, we'll either have calls of like somebody forgot to put in the hardener and so they just coated the floor. They thought that somebody, I thought person A was going to do it, and so I just started coating, and then I realized we have this whole extra bottle of hardener, and at that point it's just let it fully dry out and then go in screen and recoat it. So it's definitely salvageable. It's not a full resand or anything like that.
For 12 years that I've been with Norton, and we still fight it every day, is really just skipping grits. Going from a 36 to an 80, for example. And when you really think about abrasives, it's pretty rudimentary. Think of coarse grits as big rocks and fine grits as little rocks. And you cannot get scratches out with an 80 grit. You can't get 36 grit scratches out. And so you're going to get a lot of micro scratches, if you will, and certainly it's magnified depending upon the color, that you're putting on the floor. And the hardest thing is getting guys to understand that instead of going 36 and 80, you can go 50 and go 80 and get a much better looking floor, and you're still not adding a process to the sanding process.
Right.
And so, when we hear that, we get guys, and once they try it, you forget it. I mean, they're sold, they're done. They're going to, they'll change the process. It's just getting them to try it for the first time is a challenge, as you well know.